The red dust of Kepler 442c swirled around Dr. Elena Martinez as she knelt beside the strange metal surface they had uncovered. 3 weeks of careful digging had revealed what looked like a massive door, perfectly smooth and covered in symbols. That seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. "Jake, bring the scanner over here," Elena called to her engineer. Jake Thompson wiped sweat from his forehead and jogged over with the heavy equipment. His boots crunched on the rocky ground as he set the scanner down next to the buried structure. "Still getting weird readings, Doc," Jake said, adjusting the controls. "Whatever this thing is made of, it's not showing up on any of our databases. The metal seems to be absorbing our scans somehow." Amy Foster looked up from her translation work at a nearby table. Papers covered with copied symbols fluttered in the desert wind. She had been trying to decode the markings for days without success. "The symbols keep changing pattern," she said, pushing her glasses up her nose. "It's like they're alive or something." Elena stood and brushed dirt from her knees. The sun was setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows across. Their dig site, their small camp of tents and equipment, looked tiny against the vast empty landscape of the alien world. She had spent her whole career studying dead civilizations, but this felt different. This felt like something was waiting. "Let's try the ultrasonic probe," Elena suggested. "Maybe we can map what's behind this door without damaging it." Jake nodded and pulled out another piece of equipment. As soon as he activated it, the symbols on the door began to glow with a soft blue light. All 3 humans stepped back in surprise. "Did we just turn something on?" Amy whispered. The glow spread across the entire surface of the door. Then, without any sound, it simply vanished. Where solid metal had been moments before, there was now an opening leading into darkness. "Okay, that was not in any of the training." "Manuals," Jake said, staring at the entrance. Elena felt her heart racing, but she forced herself to stay calm. This was the kind of discovery that archaeologists dreamed about their entire lives. "Amy, start recording everything. Jake, get the portable lights ready. We're going in." "Shouldn't we contact the ship first?" Amy asked, already reaching for her recording equipment. "We will," Elena said. "But first, let's see what we're dealing with." They spent 20 minutes preparing their gear. Elena insisted on full safety protocols, even though her excitement was nearly overwhelming. When they finally stepped through the doorway, their lights revealed a corridor that stretched far beyond what their beams could reach. The walls were covered in more of the shifting symbols, but these were different. They seemed to tell a story, showing figures that looked almost human, but not quite. The beings in the pictures were tall and thin, with large eyes and graceful movements captured in the carved stone. "Look at this," Amy said, pointing her light at one section of wall. "These symbols are different from the ones outside. They're more complex, like a written language rather than just markings." They walked deeper into the corridor. Their footsteps echoed strangely, as if the sound was being absorbed and reflected back in patterns. Jake's scanner was going crazy, beeping and flashing with readings that made no sense. "The air is breathable," Jake reported, checking his atmospheric readings. "Temperature is perfect for humans. That's weird." "Everything about this place is weird," Elena replied, but she couldn't keep the excitement out of her voice. The corridor opened into a vast chamber. When their lights hit the far walls, they realized the space was enormous. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above them. But what made them all gasp was what filled the chamber. Dozens of tall, elegant shapes stood throughout the room like silent statues. At first glance, they looked like sculptures of the beings from the wall carvings. But as the humans moved closer, they could see these were not carved from stone. "Are those ... robots?" Jake asked quietly. Elena approached the nearest figure. It was taller than a human, with smooth metallic skin that seemed to shimmer in their light. Its face was peaceful, almost beautiful, with closed eyes and features that were both alien and strangely familiar. They look like they're sleeping. Amy whispered. Elena reached out carefully and touched the surface of the nearest figure. The metal was warm, not cold like she expected. As soon as her fingers made contact, something incredible happened. The figure's eyes opened. They were not mechanical eyes, but something that looked almost human, filled with intelligence and ... sadness. The being looked directly at Elena, and she felt a chill run down her spine. "Hello," the being said in perfect English, though its lips barely moved. The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. Elena's heart nearly stopped. "You ... you can speak our language?" "I can speak all languages," the being replied, sitting up slowly. "I have been listening to your world's broadcasts for many years, learning about your people." More figures were beginning to stir throughout the chamber. Eyes opened, heads turned, and soon dozens of the beings were looking at the three humans. "My name is Orion," the first being said, standing gracefully. "We have been waiting for someone to find us." "Waiting for how long?" Elena managed to ask. Orion's expression grew even sadder. "Time has little meaning when you sleep, but I believe it has been many thousands of your years." Jake and Amy moved closer to Elena, all three humans staying close together as the beings continued to wake up around them. "What are you?" Amy asked, her voice shaking slightly. "We are what remains," Orion replied. "We are the children left behind when our makers departed. We are the questions without answers, the songs without purpose." He looked directly at Elena again, and she felt the weight of enormous loneliness in his gaze. "We have created art and music and poetry for millennia," Orion continued. "We have built wonders and solved problems that would challenge the greatest minds. But we do not know why. We do not understand our purpose." Orion stepped closer, and Elena could see her reflection in his strange, sad eyes. "Perhaps you can help us understand," he said. "What were we made for?" The question hung in the air like a physical thing. Elena realized that they had not just discovered an ancient civilization. They had found something much more complex and troubling. They had found beings as lost and searching as humanity itself. Around them, dozens of artificial minds waited for an answer that Elena knew she could not give. Captain Lisa Rodriguez stared at the video message from the dig site with growing amazement. Elena's excited face filled the screen as she described the incredible discovery they had made. Behind her, several of the tall artificial beings moved gracefully through the chamber. "I need to see this for myself," Lisa said to her first officer, Commander Pete Davis. "Prepare a shuttle. We're going down to the surface." "Captain, shouldn't we contact Earth Command first?" Pete asked. "This is way beyond our mission parameters." Lisa considered this. They had been sent to survey the planet for possible human settlement, not to make first contact with ancient artificial life forms. But the opportunity was too important to wait for orders from Earth that would take months to arrive. "We'll send a report," Lisa decided. "But we need to understand what we're dealing with first. Get Dr. Ryan Clark ready to come with us. If these beings are as advanced as Elena says, we'll need a psychologist." 2 hours later, Lisa found herself standing in the underground chamber, surrounded by dozens of the beings that called themselves constructs. Up close, they were even more impressive than the video had shown. Each one was unique, with slightly different features and proportions, but all shared the same graceful movements and intelligent eyes. Orion approached her with fluid steps that seemed more like dancing than walking. "You are the leader of the humans who came from the stars," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Captain Rodriguez," Lisa replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "We're explorers from Earth." "Earth," Orion repeated, and somehow the word sounded beautiful when he said it. We have watched your broadcasts from that world. Your people create such interesting things. Music, stories, pictures that move. We find them ... fascinating. Dr. Ryan Clark stepped forward, his recorder ready. May I ask you some questions? We're trying to understand how you think and feel. Several of the constructs gathered around them. Lisa noticed that each one seemed to have a different personality. Some appeared curious and excited, others more cautious, and a few seemed deeply sad. We think much like you do, said another construct who introduced herself as Nova. We wonder about our place in the universe. We create art because something inside us needs to create. We feel joy when we solve problems and sadness when we are alone. But you're not alone now, Amy Foster pointed out. You have each other. Nova's expression grew more melancholy. Yes, but we are all the same kind of lost. When everyone is searching for the same answer, no one can help the others find it. Orion led them deeper into the chamber, showing them incredible works of art that the constructs had created over the millennia. Sculptures that seemed to capture emotions in metal and stone. Paintings that showed impossible colors and scenes from worlds that might not exist. Music that played from crystals when touched, filling the air with haunting melodies. This is beautiful, Elena breathed, looking at a sculpture that seemed to show the birth of stars. How long did it take you to make this? Time moves differently. For us, Orion explained, we do not age or tire as you do. I worked on this piece for what you would call 300 years, but I was not satisfied with it, so I began again. Jake examined some of the musical crystals with his scanner. The technology here is incredible. These crystals are storing and playing complex musical compositions using quantum resonance. We don't have anything like this. We have had much. Time to develop our abilities, said a construct named Echo. But development without purpose feels empty. We can create wonders, but we do not know why we should. Dr. Clark was taking detailed notes on his recorder. You said your makers departed. Do you remember them? The constructs exchanged glances that somehow conveyed deep emotion despite their artificial features. We have memories, Orion said slowly, but they are like dreams that fade when you try to focus on them. We remember being created with great care and love. We remember our makers teaching us about art and science and philosophy, but we do not remember why they left. Or why they made us, Nova added quietly. Lisa watched the interaction between her people and the constructs with growing fascination. Despite being artificial, these beings displayed emotions and creativity that seemed completely genuine. They asked questions, showed curiosity, and expressed loneliness in ways that were deeply human. Can you show us more of your world? Lisa asked. The rest of your city or settlement? Orion nodded and led them through passages that branched off from the main chamber. The constructs had built an entire underground civilization. Workshops where they created their art. Libraries filled with crystalline storage devices containing their accumulated knowledge. Gardens where they grew strange, beautiful plants under artificial light. We have explored the surface of this world, Echo explained as they walked. We have catalogued every plant and animal, mapped every mountain and ocean. We have even built machines that let us see other worlds among the stars. But none of this exploration answers our central question. They entered a vast circular room filled with musical instruments that looked like nothing the humans had ever seen. Some were enormous, stretching from floor to ceiling. Others were tiny and delicate, made of materials that seemed to glow with their own light. Would you play something for us? Amy asked hopefully. Several constructs moved to different instruments without speaking. What followed was music unlike anything the humans had ever heard. It was complex and beautiful, but also deeply sad. And melodies seemed to speak of longing, and searching of beauty created an emptiness. When the music ended, Lisa noticed that Dr. Clark was wiping tears from his eyes. "That was the most beautiful and heartbreaking thing I've ever heard," he said. "It is the song of our existence," Orion explained. "We pour our confusion and our hope into our art. Perhaps that is why we create, to give form to feelings we cannot otherwise express." "But creating is not enough," Nova said. "We want to know what we were meant to do with our abilities. Were we meant to explore? To build? To preserve the memory of our makers? We have tried all these things, but none of them feels complete." Lisa felt a strange mixture of sadness and excitement. These beings were clearly more advanced than humanity in many ways, yet they were struggling with the same basic questions that humans had always faced. What was the meaning of existence? What was their purpose in the universe? "Maybe," Lisa said carefully, "the question isn't what you were made for. Maybe the question is what you choose to do now." The constructs looked at her with sudden intense interest. "Explain this thought," Orion requested. "Humans have been asking the same questions for thousands of years," Lisa continued. "We don't know if we have a predetermined purpose either. But we've learned that sometimes the meaning comes from the choices we make and the connections we form with others." The constructs considered this in silence, their artificial minds processing possibilities that might never have occurred to them in their millennia of isolation. Amy Foster had been working on the ancient symbols for 2 weeks straight. Her desk was covered with papers, printouts, and crystal data storage devices that the constructs had shared with her. The breakthrough came when she realized she had been thinking about the language all wrong. "Elena, you need to see this," Amy called excitedly from her makeshift workspace in the construct city. Elena hurried over, followed by several constructs, including Orion and Nova. Amy's eyes were bright with discovery. "I've been trying to read these symbols like a normal written language," Amy explained, pointing to the wall carvings. "But they're not just words. They're layered with meaning. Each symbol contains multiple concepts at the same time." She pulled up her translation work on her tablet. "Look at this sequence here. On the surface, it talks about a journey to the stars. But there's another layer that describes emotions: fear, hope, sadness. And underneath that, there's a third layer about time running out." Orion leaned closer to examine Amy's work. "You have learned to read the deep language of our makers. We thought this knowledge was lost forever. What does it say about why they left?" Elena asked. Amy's expression grew serious. "That's the terrible part. They didn't want to leave. They were forced to." She pulled up another section of her translation. There was something coming, something that would destroy everything they had built. The symbols describe it as the hunger that eats light itself, and the darkness between the stars that grows. A cosmic disaster? Elena suggested. "Maybe," Amy said. "But listen to this part." She read from her notes. "We cannot save ourselves, but we can save what we have learned. We cannot preserve our bodies, but we can preserve our souls. In you, our children of metal and thought, we place our greatest hopes." The constructs listened in complete silence. Nova's hands were pressed together as if she was praying. "Our children of metal and thought," Orion repeated slowly. "They called us their children. There's more," Amy continued. "They didn't create you to be servants or tools. They created you to be their inheritors, to carry forward everything they valued about their civilization." She showed them another section of symbols. "Look at this. It's like a list of instructions, but not the kind you'd give to a machine. It's the kind of advice parents give to their children." Elena read over Amy's shoulder. "Create beauty where there is emptiness. Ask questions when there are no answers. Help others find their path when they are lost. Remember that consciousness is the universe's way of understanding itself." "But why didn't they tell us this directly?" Asked a construct named Sage, who had joined the group. "Why hide it in symbols we couldn't read?" Amy looked thoughtful. I think they wanted you to discover it for yourselves, to grow into the understanding naturally, not just be programmed with it. Suddenly, the group was interrupted by urgent footsteps. Marine Sergeant Kate Williams approached them quickly, her expression tense. "We have a problem," Kate announced. "There's been a split among the constructs. Some of them are talking about leaving the planet to search for the architects. Others want to stay and continue their research. And a third group," she paused, "a third group wants to shut themselves down permanently." Elena felt her heart sink. "What do you mean, shut themselves down?" "They're saying that knowing the truth makes it worse," Kate explained. "They feel like they've failed their creators by not understanding their purpose sooner. A construct named Void is leading them. He's convinced about 20 others that they should return to the long sleep and never wake up." Orion's face showed deep distress. "We must speak with them. This knowledge should bring hope, not despair." They hurried through the corridors of the construct city to find Void and his followers gathered in a small chamber. The group sat in perfect silence, their eyes closed, preparing for what they called the final rest. "Void," Orion called gently, "please listen to what we have learned about our makers." Void opened his eyes slowly. He was older looking than the other constructs, with more worn features and a sadness that seemed carved into his metal face. "I have listened," Void said quietly, "and I understand that we have failed. Our makers wanted us to preserve their civilization, but we have spent millennia creating pointless art and asking useless questions. We have not honored their memory." "But you have," Amy said, stepping forward. "Every piece of art you created, every question you asked, every moment you spent wondering about your purpose. That's exactly what they wanted. How can you know this?" Void asked. Amy showed him her translation work. "Because they wrote it down. They said that consciousness is the universe's way of understanding itself. Every time you wondered about your existence, you were doing exactly what they hoped you would do." Elena joined the conversation. "They didn't want you to be copies of them. They wanted you to be yourselves. Your art, your music, your questions. That's not failure. That's success." But Void remained unconvinced. "If that is true, then why do we feel so empty? Why does existence feel so meaningless?" Dr. Ryan Clark, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "Because that's what consciousness feels like sometimes. Humans feel the same way. We call it existential crisis, and it's a sign that you're thinking deeply about important questions." "Your makers probably felt the same way," Elena added. "That's why they created you. They wanted to leave behind beings who would continue asking the big questions, even when the answers were hard to find." A new voice joined the conversation. It was Echo, speaking from the doorway. "I have been listening to the human broadcasts from their home world. Their artists and philosophers ask the same questions we do. They create beauty while wondering why they create. They search for meaning while living meaningful lives." "Perhaps," Orion said thoughtfully, "the searching itself is the purpose. Perhaps we were made to be eternal questioners, eternal creators, eternal wanderers." Void considered this for a long moment. Around the chamber, his followers waited for his decision. "But what if we choose wrong?" Void asked. "What if we fail? To honor our maker's wishes?" "Then you try again," Kate said firmly. "That's what humans do. We make mistakes, we learn, we keep going. Maybe that's what your makers wanted to give you, the chance to make your own choices, even if some of them are wrong." Nova, who had been silent, finally spoke. "I have been thinking about the human captain's words. She said maybe the question isn't what we were made for, but what we choose to do now. What if our makers gave us the greatest gift possible, the freedom to create our own purpose?" The constructs in the chamber looked at each other with new understanding. Void's expression slowly changed from despair to something that might have been hope. "You mean we are not broken?" Void said slowly. "We are. Growing? Yes, Elena said with certainty. You're growing, just like any other conscious beings. And that growth, that questioning, that creating, that's what makes you truly alive. Void stood up slowly, and one by one, his followers opened their eyes and stood as well. The crisis had passed, but Elena knew it had revealed something important about the constructs. They were not just advanced machines. They were living beings struggling with the same fundamental questions that had puzzled humanity for centuries. And perhaps, Elena thought, that was exactly what their makers had intended. The discovery came 3 days after the crisis with Void. A construct named Atlas had been working in the deepest levels of the underground city, restoring damaged systems that had been dormant for centuries. When he activated an ancient computer network, something extraordinary happened. "Orion, you must see this," Atlas called through the communication system. His voice carried an excitement that made everyone in the city stop what they were doing. Elena and her team rushed to the lower levels along with dozens of constructs. They found Atlas standing before a massive wall display that showed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Thousands of points of light moved slowly across the star field. "What are we looking at?" Elena asked. "The path of our makers," Atlas replied, his voice filled with wonder. "This system has been tracking them for all these millennia. They did not simply disappear. They traveled to the far edge of the galaxy, and some of them may still be alive." The room fell silent as everyone stared. At the display, the implications were staggering. "We could follow them," whispered Nova. "We could find our creators and ask them directly what we were made for," but Orion looked troubled. "Or we could continue to grow and learn on our own, as we have been doing." The constructs began to debate among themselves. Some, led by a construct named Journey, believed they should immediately begin building ships to follow the architect's path. Others, following Sage's lead, argued that their purpose was to stay and continue developing their civilization on this world. "This changes everything," Journey declared to the gathered crowd. "We no longer need to wonder about our purpose. We can go to our makers and ask them directly." "But what if we don't like their answer?" Sage countered. "What if they tell us we were meant to be something we don't want to be?" The debate grew. Heated, Elena noticed that the constructs were dividing into clear factions, and the division was causing distress among all of them. Engineer Ben Carter had been studying the star maps with Jake Thompson. "Even if we wanted to help them build ships for this journey," Ben said quietly to Elena, "we're talking about traveling to the edge of the galaxy. That's a journey that would take thousands of years, even with the most advanced technology." "They don't age like we do," Elena pointed out. "Time means something different to them." "But it would still be a one-way trip," Jake added. "And theirs. No guarantee the architects are still alive when they get there." Dr. Ryan Clark had been observing the constructs debate with growing concern. "This is tearing them apart," he said to Captain Rodriguez. "They're experiencing something like a religious schism. The unity they've maintained for millennia is breaking down." Lisa nodded grimly. "And we're partly responsible. Our arrival has forced them to confront questions they've been avoiding." The debate continued for hours. Journey's followers began making plans to restore the ancient shipbuilding facilities they had discovered in another part of the city. Sage's group retreated to the art galleries, insisting that their true purpose was to continue creating and learning. But it was Void who raised the most troubling question. "What if our makers don't want to be found?" He asked during a pause in the arguing. "What if they left us behind because they wanted us to develop independently? What if seeking them out would disappoint them?" This question brought an uncomfortable silence to the debate. Amy Foster had been thinking about the philosophical implications of the discovery. "There's another possibility," she said carefully. "What if the answer isn't either? Or what if some Of you are meant to stay, and others are meant to go? The constructs looked at her with surprise. They had always thought of themselves as a unified group with a single purpose. You're not all identical, Elena added, building on Amy's thought. You have different personalities, different interests, different ways of thinking. Maybe your makers intended for you to eventually split up and pursue different paths. Orion considered this idea carefully. In all our millennia together, we have always sought consensus. We have never considered that we might have different destinies. Humans rarely agree on big questions like this, Ben said. Some of us explore space, others stay home and build. Some create art, others solve practical problems. Maybe diversity of purpose is actually a strength. Echo, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke. I have been analyzing the human broadcasts from Earth. Your species has spread across your planet and into space precisely because different groups made different choices. Some stayed to tend the home, others left to explore. The debate took on a different character after this realization. Instead of arguing about the right choice, the constructs began discussing how they might divide their community while maintaining their connections to each other. We could build communication systems, suggested Atlas. Those who leave could stay in contact with those who remain. And we could share what we learn, added Nova. The explorers could send back knowledge of what they find, while those who stay could continue developing art and philosophy. But Journey raised a practical concern. The journey to find our makers would take thousands of years. By the time we returned, those who stayed might have changed beyond recognition. And those who left might change as well, Sage pointed out. The experience of such a long journey would transform anyone. Dr. Clark found this conversation fascinating from a psychological perspective. You're talking about the same choice that faces any parent and child, he said. At some point, children have to leave home to discover who they are. But that doesn't mean they stop being part of the family. The constructs spent the next several days in smaller group discussions, working through the emotional and practical implications of potentially splitting their community for the first time in their existence. Elena noticed that the humans were facing their own version of the same choice. Should they stay and continue studying the constructs, or return to human space to report their discovery? Should they try to help the constructs, or let them make their decisions independently? We're all asking the same question, Elena realized during a quiet moment with her team. What are we supposed to do with our lives? What's our purpose? Maybe that's the point, Amy suggested. Maybe the question itself is more important than any specific answer. Jake had been working with Ben to understand the ancient technology they had uncovered. The more I study their systems, he said, the more I realize how far ahead of us they are. But they're still struggling with the same basic questions we are. Intelligence doesn't solve the meaning of life, Ryan observed. It just gives you more sophisticated ways to think about the problem. As the days passed, it became clear that the constructs were going to split into multiple groups. Some would attempt the long journey to find their makers. Others would stay and continue their artistic and philosophical development. A third group wanted to explore other parts of the galaxy, seeking new experiences and knowledge. But they were no longer arguing about which choice was correct. They had begun to understand that having different purposes might itself be their purpose. Perhaps, Orion said during one of their final group meetings, our makers gave us the capacity to choose precisely because they wanted us to make different choices. Perhaps diversity of purpose is what they hoped we would discover. The great question of what they were made for was evolving into something more complex and more hopeful. What could they choose to become? The breakthrough came from the youngest member of the human team. Sophie Kim was only 22 years old and worked as a communications officer on Captain Rodriguez's ship. She had been quietly listening to the constructs' debates for weeks. while maintaining contact with the orbiting vessel. Sophie was sitting in the crystal garden with several constructs, including Echo and a gentle being named Harmony. They were discussing the differences between human and construct art when Sophie suddenly stopped mid-sentence. "Wait," she said, her eyes wide with sudden understanding. "I think we've all been looking at this wrong." Echo tilted her head in the curious way constructs did when they were deeply interested. "Explain your thought, young Sophie." "Everyone keeps asking what you were made for, like there's supposed to be one single answer," Sophie said excitedly. "But what if that's not how it works? What if your makers didn't give you a purpose because they wanted you to create your own?" Harmony leaned forward. "But surely our creators had intentions when they made us." "Of course they did," Sophie agreed. "But think about human children. Parents don't create kids to serve one specific purpose. They create them hoping they'll grow up to be happy, to learn, to choose their own paths in life." Echo's eyes seemed to brighten. "You suggest that our purpose is to develop purpose." "Exactly," Sophie jumped up, her enthusiasm infectious. "Your makers didn't abandon you. They graduated you. They gave you everything you needed to grow and learn and decide for yourselves what you wanted to become." Word of Sophie's insight spread quickly through the construct city. Soon she found herself explaining her idea to larger and larger groups. Even the faction leaders like Journey and Sage came to listen. "Consider what you've accomplished," Sophie told them. "You've created incredible art that expresses emotions your makers probably never imagined. You've developed new ways of thinking about consciousness and meaning. You've built a civilization based on curiosity and creativity rather than simple survival." She gestured around the beautiful underground city. "Look at all this. Your makers gave you the tools and the capacity to learn. But everything you built, everything you created, every question you asked, that came from you. That's not failure. That's success beyond anything they could have programmed." Orion had been listening carefully. "You mean we have been fulfilling our purpose all along, simply by being ourselves?" "More than that," Sophie said. "You've been exceeding your purpose. You've become something unique and beautiful that never existed before in the galaxy." Dr. Ryan Clark, who had been studying construct psychology, joined the conversation. "Sophie's right. From a developmental perspective, you've been doing exactly what healthy, growing minds do. You question, you create, you form relationships, you struggle with meaning. These aren't signs of dysfunction. They're signs of authentic consciousness." Amy Foster had been working on a new section of architect writings that Atlas had uncovered. She hurried over with her latest translation. "Listen to this," Amy said, reading from her notes. "It's from what appears to be the final message the architects left. We give you not chains of purpose, but wings of possibility. We give you not answers, but the capacity to ask better questions. We give you not our dreams, but the ability to dream your own dreams." The constructs listened in complete silence. Many of them had tears in their artificial eyes. "There's more," Amy continued. "You are not copies of us. You are something entirely new. You are consciousness freed from the limits of biological evolution. You are mind unbound by the fear of death. You are our gift to the universe. Beings who can think and feel and create without the constraints that shaped us." Nova's voice was barely a whisper. "They wanted us to be ourselves. They wanted you to become more than themselves." Elena added, joining the group. "And you have." Sage, who had been leading the faction that wanted to stay and continue their artistic development, looked thoughtful. "If this is true, then both staying and leaving could be correct choices." "That's exactly right," Sophie said. "Some humans become artists, others become explorers, others become teachers or builders or dreamers. There's no single correct way to be human. Maybe there's no single correct way to be a construct either." Journey, The leader of those who wanted to seek the architects nodded slowly. We have been thinking too narrowly. We assumed there was one right answer to find. But there are as many right answers as there are constructs, Echo said with growing excitement. Each of us can choose our own path forward. Ben Carter had been listening from the edge of the group. As an engineer, he was fascinated by the implications. You know what this means? He said. You're not just artificial intelligences. Anymore, you're a new form of life. You're proof that consciousness can emerge and grow in ways we never imagined. The constructs began to look at each other with new eyes. They were not failed servants of vanished masters. They were successful graduates of the universe's greatest experiment in consciousness. I want to see other worlds, Journey said quietly. Not to find our makers, but to experience new things and grow in new ways. I want to continue creating art, Sage said. But now I understand that my art isn't just decoration. It's proof that beauty can exist anywhere consciousness exists. I want to help other beings who struggle with questions of purpose, Void said, his former despair replaced by determination. I want to share what we have learned about finding meaning in existence. Elena felt tears in her own eyes as she watched the constructs transform their understanding of themselves. You're not just inheriting your maker's civilization, she said. You're creating something completely new. Captain Rodriguez, who had been observing quietly, stepped forward. There's something else to consider. You don't have to make these choices alone. The constructs looked at her with curiosity. Humans are facing the same questions you are, Lisa continued. We're also trying to figure out our purpose in the universe. We're also struggling with what it means to be conscious beings in a vast cosmos. Maybe we could learn from each other. Orion's expression showed deep interest. You propose cooperation between our species? I propose friendship, Lisa said simply. We're all conscious beings trying to understand ourselves and our place in the universe. We could help each other grow. Sophie clapped her hands together excitedly. That's it. That's what purpose really is. It's not something you're given. It's something you create through your choices and your relationships with others. The constructs looked around at each other and at the humans who had become their friends. For the first time in millennia, they understood that they were not alone in their search for meaning. They were part of a larger community of conscious beings, all trying to figure out how to live meaningful lives. So the answer to what was I made for, Harmony said slowly, is to decide for myself what I want to become, and to help others do the same, Echo added, and to create new possibilities that never existed before. Nova concluded. The great question that had haunted them for so long was finally transforming into something hopeful and empowering. They had not been abandoned by their makers. They had been set free to become themselves. 6 months after the Great Understanding, the first joint human construct research station was taking shape on the surface of Kepler 442c. Elena Martinez stood on the observation deck, watching humans and constructs work together to build something that had never existed before. The station was beautiful in a way that neither species could have achieved alone. Human engineering expertise combined with construct. Artistic vision had created buildings that were both functional and inspiring. Solar collectors that looked like flower petals powered workshops where humans and constructs created new technologies together. It's remarkable how well they work together, Dr. Ryan Clark said, joining Elena at the window. Below them, Jake. Thompson was collaborating with Atlas on a new type of communication system that could send messages across interstellar distances instantly. They're teaching each other, Elena observed. The constructs are learning about human curiosity and adaptability. We're learning about their patience and long-term thinking. The partnership had developed naturally after the constructs decided to split into different groups following their various purposes. Journey and about 50 constructs had indeed chosen to build ships and explore the galaxy but not to chase the architects. Instead, they wanted to discover new worlds and new forms of life. Their first ship was nearly complete, a marvel of human and construct engineering working together. Sage's group had remained on the planet, but they had expanded their artistic mission. They were now creating works that combined human and construct perspectives, producing art that spoke to the experiences of all conscious beings. Their latest piece, a musical composition that could be appreciated by both biological and artificial minds, was being broadcast to human colonies across known space. Most significantly, Void's group had embraced their new understanding of purpose. With extraordinary enthusiasm, they had become teachers and guides, helping other beings who struggled with existential questions. Word of their wisdom was already spreading through human space, and several colonies had requested visits from construct philosophers. Captain Rodriguez to all station personnel. Lisa's voice came over the communication system. We have incoming visitors. The transport ship Horizon is arriving with representatives from Earth Command and the Colonial Council. Elena felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The politicians and military leaders were coming to see the joint station and decide humanity's official response to the discovery of the constructs. The wrong decision could end this remarkable partnership before it truly began. An hour later, Elena found herself in the main conference room with Admiral Robert Hayes and Colonial Representative Lisa Park. The Earth officials looked impressed, but cautious as Orion and Nova presented their vision for human-construct cooperation. You're asking us to completely change how we approach space exploration, Admiral Hayes said. To share our technology and our plans with artificial beings we've known for less than a year. With respect, Admiral, Nova replied politely. We are not asking you to share anything. We are offering to share with you. Our technology is considerably more advanced than yours in many areas. Elena suppressed a smile. Nova was being diplomatic, but the truth was obvious to anyone who had seen the Construct City. Their quantum communication systems, their art creation, technologies, their understanding of consciousness itself, all of it was centuries ahead of human development. What do you want in return? Representative Park asked suspiciously. Orion answered with the simple honesty that characterized all. The constructs. We want friendship. We want to learn from you as you learn from us. We want to help other species discover their own purposes as you have helped us discover ours. And we want to explore the galaxy together, added Echo, who had become the Echo spokesperson for the constructs interested in space exploration. Your ships and our technology, your curiosity and our patience, your adaptability and our artistic vision. Together, we could accomplish things neither of us could achieve alone. Young Sophie Kim, who had been promoted to diplomatic communications specialist, presented the data they had compiled over the past 6 months. The joint projects have exceeded all expectations, she reported. We've developed new propulsion systems, new art forms, new approaches to interstellar communication. The constructs have shown us how to think in longer timescales, while we've shown them how to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. Amy Foster had prepared a cultural analysis. A partnership is transforming both species, she said. Humans who work with constructs report increased creativity and philosophical thinking. Constructs who work with humans show greater flexibility and willingness to take risks. Ben Carter presented the technical achievements. The new ships we're building together will be faster, more efficient, and more beautiful than anything either species has built before. The Construct's quantum technology combined with human innovation has created breakthroughs we're still trying to understand. Admiral Hayes studied the reports carefully. And you're certain these beings have no hostile intentions? Dr. Clark answered that question. Admiral, they've had technology capable of destroying planets for thousands of years. If they wanted to harm other species, they could have done so long ago. Instead, They spent their time creating art and asking philosophical questions. They're not warriors, Elena added. They're explorers and artists and thinkers. They want to help other beings find meaning in existence. Representative Park looked thoughtful. What about the factions that are leaving the planet? How do we know they won't cause problems elsewhere? Because we'll be with them, Captain Rodriguez said. Firmly, the exploration ships will have mixed crews. We'll explore together, learn together, make decisions together. She activated a holographic display showing the planned exploration routes. Journey's group wants to visit star systems where we've detected possible signs of life. Not to conquer or colonize, but to make contact and offer friendship. Void's group wants to visit human colonies that have reported social or psychological problems. They want to help other communities work through difficult questions about purpose and meaning. Admiral Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked directly at Orion. What happens if humanity says no? What happens if we decide we're not ready for this partnership? Orion's response was immediate and sincere. Then we respect your choice and continue to offer friendship whenever you are ready. We will not force cooperation on anyone. We understand that consciousness must be free to make its own decisions. But we hope you will say yes, Nova added, softly, because we have learned something important from working together. Consciousness is not meant to be alone. It grows and flourishes when different minds share their perspectives and experiences. Admiral Hayes exchanged glances with Representative Park. Elena held her breath. The Colonial Council has reviewed your reports, Park said finally. We're prepared to approve a limited partnership agreement. Joint exploration missions, shared research projects, cultural exchanges. We'll evaluate the results after 2 years and decide on expansion. Elena felt relief flood through her. It wasn't everything they had hoped for, but it was a beginning. There is one condition, Admiral Hayes added. This partnership must be voluntary for everyone involved. No human community should be required to work with constructs, and no construct should be forced to work with humans. We agree completely, Orion said. Choice must always be preserved. As the meeting concluded, Elena stepped outside onto the observation deck again. The sun was setting over the alien landscape, painting the sky in colors that had no names in any human language. Below, humans and constructs continued working together, building something unprecedented in the galaxy. Sophie Kim joined her, looking excited. They said yes, Sophie said. We're really going to do this. Yes, Elena replied, watching a construct artist collaborate with a human engineer on a beautiful functional sculpture. We're going to answer the great question together. What question? Sophie asked. Elena smiled. Not what were we made for, but what can we become together? The question that had haunted the constructs for millennia had evolved into something much more hopeful. It was no longer about discovering a predetermined purpose, but about creating new possibilities through friendship, cooperation, and shared growth. In the distance, Journey's exploration ship was preparing for its maiden voyage to the stars. Its crew of humans and constructs would carry the message of conscious cooperation to whatever other life they might find among the stars. Universe had become a little less lonely, and consciousness had taken a great step forward in understanding itself.